and we'll go from there. We should be looking at a test about the middle of next week. Usually these take about a week and a half. So we're talking about the Johnson administration, and get to know Lyndon Johnson, because really we haven't told you much about him. We're going to start out with a profile on Lyndon Johnson, tell you a little bit about him from birth to death, and kind of go from there. So this is a profile on Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Baines Johnson, and that's B-A-I-N-E-S, Lyndon Baines Johnson, B-A-I-N-E-S, was born on August 27, 1908, August 27, 1908, in a farmhouse near Stonewall, Texas. So Lyndon Baines Johnson was born on August 27, 1908, in a farmhouse near Stonewall, Texas. And he was the oldest of 5 children. He was the oldest of 5 children. He had 1 brother and 3 sisters, but he was the oldest of the 5 children with 1 brother and 3 sisters. Now at the age of 5, his family moved to nearby Johnson City, which ironically was a town founded by his grandfather. So when he was 5 years old, the Johnson family moved to nearby Johnson City, Texas, which was actually a town founded by his grandfather. So he he was born in Stonewall, Texas, and at the age of 5 they moved to nearby Johnson City, Texas, which was a town founded by his grandfather. Well, in 1924, Lyndon Johnson graduated from high school in Johnson City. 1924, he graduated from high school. And his parents urged him to do what? Go to college. But he was not interested at the time. So after his graduation from high school in Johnson City, Texas in 1924, his parents did urge him to go to college, but he wasn't interested at the time. So what did he go do? Went and found a job. Very good, he went and found a job. Now, any of you around here that are thinking about going to college or not sure if that's your bag, maybe you ought to take the Lyndon Johnson route here, because what he did is he was not interested in college when he graduated from high school, so he went and got a job. So after finding a job and working that job for a period of time, he told his parents, quote, "I'm sick and tired of working with my hands. I don't know if I can work with my brain, but I'm ready to try." So basically what he did is he went to work and found out, this is a little bit, I don't really like this. I don't like working with my hands in this manual labor. I think I'm smarter than that. So after he worked for a period of time, he told his parents, "I'm sick of working with my hands. I don't know if I can work with my brain, but I'm ready to try." So he decided maybe he was a little better educationally than just working as a laborer. So what he did, had no money, so he went to the Johnson City Bank. You'll wish this was the case today. He went to the Johnson City Bank and he borrowed $75 so he could enroll in college. He went to the Johnson City Bank and borrowed $75 and enrolled in college. So after deciding he was tired of working with his hands and wanted to work with his brain, he went to the local bank in Johnson City, Texas, and borrowed $75 and enrolled at Southwest Texas Teachers College. He enrolled at Southwest Texas Teachers College. So Johnson borrows $75 from the Johnson City Bank and enrolls in college at Southwest Texas Teachers College. And he finished his degree, graduated from college, and he got a job at Sam Houston High School in Houston, Texas. He got a teaching job at Sam Houston High School in Houston, Texas. So he finishes his teaching degree at Southwest Texas Teachers College and gets a job at Sam Houston High School in Houston, Texas. Well, he didn't really like it. And he just taught for 1 year and then decided he was going to enter politics. So he taught at Sam Houston High School in Houston, Texas for just 1 year. And he decided he was going to enter politics. Now, you just generally don't run for office, you kind of got to work your way up. And so his first political job was that of a congressional secretary. That was his first political position, not elected, hired, a congressional secretary. Anybody know, don't let the name fool you, anybody know what a congressional secretary does? What do you think a congressional secretary would do if you're hired? Anybody have any idea? Okay, you're going to be hired by who, probably? Member of Congress. And you're going to, basically your job as congressional secretary is to campaign for that politician. Okay? So he gets a job as a congressional secretary, and his job is to campaign for that person, who just happened to be Congressman Richard Kleberg. So he gets a job as a congressional secretary, that's one who campaigns for a certain politician. And the man that hired him was a congressman by the name of Richard Kleberg. So if he's a congressman, he's a member of what? House of Representatives, okay? House of Representatives. So Johnson served as a congressional secretary to Congressman Richard Kleberg. And he did that from 1932 until 1937, 5 years. He served 5 years as congressional secretary to Richard Kleberg. That's kind of a long time to work for somebody in that position. Okay, so he was there 5 years. So what's it tell you that Johnson probably did in Kleberg's office, if he worked there a long time? Practically everything. Because Kleberg was more interested in the high life of being a congressman than he was really getting anything done. So really, Lyndon Johnson performed his everyday duties and practically ran Kleberg's office for him while he was out putting on the show, because he was real interested in the high life, so to speak, of the office rather than getting anything accomplished. So anything that got accomplished for Congressman Kleberg in that 5-year period of time was because Lyndon Johnson got it done for him. Okay, he was kind of the window dressing. He was the guy that just showed up, and Johnson did all the work. Well, on September 12th, 1934, September 12th, 1934, Lyndon Johnson met a pretty young lady by the name of Claudia Alta Taylor. On September 12th, 1934, Lyndon Johnson met a young lady by the name of Claudia Alta Taylor. Now, she was better known at the time to her family and friends as Lady Bird. That was her nickname, Lady Bird. And it was kind of weird she got the name when she was young.
What?
Lady Bird. One word, Lady Bird. Now, the nickname was given to her when she was just 12 years old by a nurse, who, when she looked at the little girl, said she was as pretty as a ladybird. And it stuck. Everybody, nobody knows Lyndon Johnson's wife is Claudia Johnson. They all know her as Lady Bird. Okay, any of the things in history, Lady Bird Johnson. So Claudia Taylor was better known to family and friends as Ladybird, and this was a nickname that was given to her when she was just 12 years old by a nurse who, in treating her, said she looked as pretty as a ladybird. It just stuck. One of those things that stuck. So Lyndon Johnson decides to ask Claudia Alta Taylor to a date. And their first date was a breakfast date, followed by a long drive in the country. Okay? Pay attention, boys. Right? So the first date was a breakfast date and a long drive in the country. And Lyndon Johnson proposed to her on their first date. First date, yep. So their first date was a breakfast date, included a long drive in the country, and he proposed to her on their first date.
Did you get to know her before the date, or what?
I don't know. Well, she really didn't want to rush into marriage, but she accepted his proposal, and 10 weeks later, they were married on November 17th, 1934. 10 weeks later, they were married on November 17th, 1934. And they married in San Antonio, Texas. So, although Lady Bird did not want to rush into marriage, she accepted his proposal. And 10 weeks later, they were married on November 17th, 1934 in San Antonio, Texas. Now, She had trouble having children. She actually had 3 miscarriages before they eventually had 2 daughters. So she had difficulties. She had 3 miscarriages and finally gave birth to 2 daughters, Linda, L-Y-N-D-A, in 1944, and Lucy, L-U-C-I, in 1947. So after 3 miscarriages, the couple had 2 daughters, Linda, L-Y-N-D-A, 1944, and then Lucy, L-U-C-I, in 1947. I have both their signatures here if you're interested in remembering that. Okay? All right. Come on now. Linda and Lucy, L-U-C-I. Now, we got to kind of go back because obviously you had the children later. They marry on November 17th, 1934, have 2 daughters, Linda and Lucy. But in 1937, Johnson got tired of the congressional secretary bit and he decided to run for Congress himself. Okay? And he was running to fill the seat of a man who had died in office. Okay? So in 1937, Lyndon Johnson decides to run for Congress, which would be for the House. And he was attempting to fill the seat of a man who died in office, James P. Buchanan. So Lyndon Johnson's first run at an office will be to fill an office of someone that died while they were serving their term, a congressman by the name of James P. Buchanan. Now, they didn't have a lot of money to run for office, but Lady Bird had inherited $10,000 from her parents' passing, and she was the one that provided the money for his campaign. She took $10,000 from her inheritance, from her mother's estate, to help launch her husband's political career. So Lady Bird supplied the funding, $10,000 inheritance from her mother's estate, and provided the funding for her husband to start his political career. Well, how does the election come out? He's successful in his bid to replace Buchanan in the House of Representatives from Texas. So he is elected congressman from Texas, replacing the deceased James P. Buchanan, who had died in office. It's kind of interesting because he ends up replacing a president who dies in office too, but that's not even the story yet. So he replaces Buchanan, he serves out the rest of Buchanan's term, and in 1938 he was elected to his own term and then was re-elected in 1940. So he served out the rest of Buchanan's term, was re-elected to his own term in 1938, and then was re-elected for a second term in the House in 1940. Okay, so he again serves out the rest of Buchanan's term, is re-elected to his own term in 1938, and was re-elected for a second term in 1940. What's he decide he's going to do in 1941? Run for the Senate. Very good. So Johnson makes the decision that he's going to run for the United States Senate in 1941. Now this is kind of interesting because he again is going to run for an unexpired term, which means what? The person either left office early or passed away. Well, actually, he was running for an unexpired term for Senator Morris Shepherd, who had also died in office. So he's going to run for the Senate again for the unexpired term of Senator Morris Shepherd, who also died in office.
Maybe he's been killed.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe he just killed everybody.
Let's let our imagination get away from us.
JFK,
Now, Johnson really campaigned hard, but he lost this Senate election, and served the rest of his term in the House. So he was unsuccessful in his Senate election bid, filling the term of Morris Shepherd, who died in office. He campaigned really hard, but he lost. So he just simply went back to the House and finished his term there. Well, think about the timing. What's going to result him in getting out of politics for a period of time? What? What year is it? What happens in 1941 in our history? Pearl Harbor. So after Pearl Harbor resulted, Johnson joined the United States Navy. So events of Pearl Harbor resulted in Johnson leaving politics and joining the United States Navy. Well, he serves his country well, and after World War II ended, what did Johnson decide to do again? Run for Senate. Very good. So after he serves his country in World War II, after the events of Pearl Harbor in the United States Navy, Johnson sets his sight again to run for the United States Senate. And this is going to be a tough election. Not in the general election, but in the primary. What does that mean? Anybody know, you government wizards? Okay, what's the difference between a primary election and a general election? Right now, we're going to have a primary election in the Republican Party, and we're going to vote for what? One Republican candidate to run in the general election. Well, in other words, he's going to try to win the Democratic nomination for the Senate, and then he's going to have to run against a Democrat, or a Republican, excuse me, in the general election. Well, his biggest competition isn't going to be in the general election, it's going to be in the primary election. And the guy that he's got to run against would be former Texas Governor Coke Stevenson. So Johnson's going to be running against former Texas Governor Coke Stevenson in the Democratic primary election to earn the right to run for the Senate. And it's going to be one of these deals, to be honest with you, is this is going to be his toughest deal, okay? Now, if he wins the primary, chances are he's going to win the general election easily, because they don't have a very good candidate in the Republican Party. Because Texas is a pretty what state? Democratic. So Johnson's got to work hard. Well, Johnson campaigned hard, and he beat Stevenson 494,191 votes to 494,104 votes. 87 votes is all. That's a incredibly slim margin in a primary election. You don't really have to know the numbers. I'm making a point here. Okay, so Lyndon Johnson gets 494,191. Coke Stevenson gets 494,104. Johnson wins by 87 and earns the nickname Landslide Lyndon, which really isn't positive. Are they kind of making fun of him? Because he won by just 87 votes. So he got the name Landslide Lyndon, which was a negative nickname. Stayed with him the rest of his political career, and he didn't like it much. And you know who used to always jab him with it a lot? Which one? Bobby. Bobby used to always jab him. Referred to him as Landslide Lyndon, which irritated him. So Johnson runs against former Texas Governor Coke Stevenson for the Democratic primary election to become, or have the opportunity to run for the Senate. He defeats Stevenson by just 87 votes and receives the nickname Landslide Lyndon. Okay, so he goes to the general election. He doesn't even hardly campaign, and he defeats his Republican opponent 2-1. So the big competition was in the primary. He hardly even campaigned for the general election, and he defeated the Republican candidate over 2-1. So it was that was kind of a landslide, but they always called him landslide for the wrong reason. So, despite very little campaigning, Johnson was easily elected to the United States Senate in the general election, and he defeated his Republican opponent 2-1. Now, in these important events in his career, in January of 1953, Lyndon Johnson was elected Senate Minority Leader. Senate Minority Leader. 1953, January, he was elected Senate Minority Leader. And he was just 44 years old, and he became the youngest person in American history ever to serve in the position of Senate Minority Leader at the age of 44. So he moved his way up the ladder in the Senate to Senate Minority Leader, and at the age of 44 became the youngest man in American history to assume that position. Well, in January of 1955, at the age of 46, what does he become? Senate Majority Leader, again becoming the youngest man in American history ever to hold that office. So in January of 53, Lyndon Johnson was elected minority leader of the Senate at the age of 44, becoming the youngest person to ever serve in that position. And in January of 1955, at the age of 46, he's elected Senate majority leader, and again is the youngest in American history to assume the top post in the United States Senate. Now, as Senate Majority Leader, he worked very well with the President. And who was the President in 1955? Anybody know? Dwight Eisenhower, who is what? Republican. So Lyndon Johnson, despite the fact he was a Democrat, and we had a Democratic Senate Majority Leader, worked very well with President Dwight D. Eisenhower, despite their party differences. They worked very well together. Okay? Eisenhower liked Johnson, despite the fact he was a Democrat and the President was a Republican. Well, in July of 1955, how old is Johnson in July of 55? 46. He suffers a severe heart attack. He suffers a severe heart attack at just the age of just 46 in July of 1955. Where do you think they took him to have him recover, ironically? No, he's in Washington. Good guess, though. What would be the other possibility? Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland. And he recovered there for 5 weeks, but he continued to work from his bed. Never took any time off. So when he has his heart attack, they ship him to Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland, and he works from his hospital bed for 5 weeks. Doesn't really take a day off. He was a driven individual. Well, once he got out of the hospital, he worked harder than ever. You know, most people you'd think had a heart attack and say, geez, maybe I ought to settle down a little bit. He worked harder than ever after he got out, after his first heart attack. And he once was